Welcome everybody to this session today. I'm really excited to be welcoming another Breathwork colleague and friend, well, becoming friend for sure, Jamie Clements. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Steph. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here.
Well, I mean, let's face it, we just get to talk about what we love, which is the breath and everything that surrounds that.
Yeah.
And you know, that for me, that's fantastic because it opens up new doorways. But I want to introduce you to people who might not know you so that they get a sense of who you are. So Jamie is a breathwork specialist and the founder of The Breath Space. Go look him up on social media. I'm going to post all the links below the show notes today. Jamie's worked alongside top entrepreneurs, politicians, athletes, and many more to share the life-changing potential of breathwork and altered states of consciousness. And we're going to dig into that little piece a little bit more through the show. So after discovering firsthand just how impactful breathwork can be, Jamie strongly believes that breathwork is the most universal and powerful tool that we all have that allows us to access change in our thinking to live healthier, happier lives. He's trained in a variety of breathwork modalities, a bit like myself, and tailors this to his clients and groups accordingly. So whether it's breathwork performance for athletes, therapeutic breathwork for healing, or simple breathing techniques for nervous system regulation, Jamie believes that the power of breathwork can support us all. And so much of your bio, Jamie, completely resonates with and is I share your perspective. So let's start by actually just going straight in with why is the breath this resource that can support so many people? And if it's so amazing, why has it suddenly grown in popularity and perhaps wasn't there so much in our awareness before?
Yeah, I think it's the question. And for me, it touches there in my bio a little bit around just I think when I first came to breathwork, I was thinking, okay, it's this singular thing, it's this singular modality. It's, as we often joke about in the breathwork space and what we hear from people, it's just breathing. And it's just kind of, you get into that headspace and you're like, okay, it's breathing, but how powerful could it be? And then the deeper I went into my own practice and the more modalities that I tried and the different ends of the spectrum, the oxygen advantage, conscious connected breathing, everything in between, I sort of went, oh, like, and I always say this to people, I've had clients say this to me as well. It's like, this is so simple on the face of it. And even when you explain it to people, sometimes they're like, yeah, it makes sense, pretty simple. But then when you actually get into the practice of it, there's so much under that banner of breath work that can support us in so many different ways. And I think that for me has been the revelation that has fueled my work, I suppose, is actually just how much and how the variety of ways that we can work with the breath and support ourselves and for us, sort of the way we can support others through that as well. And I think that simplicity is perhaps part of the reason why it's only really snowballed in the West in the last however many years we want to say. I think different people would cite a different number of years. Someone might say a year, other people might say 5-10 years. I think that simplicity is definitely a big part of that, because it is something that we underestimate. And I think there's something quite unique in the human psyche where we want something to be straightforward enough that it's accessible and feels manageable and easy enough to engage with, but also like almost complicated enough that it must hold some merit and credibility. If something's too simple, then how good could it be? But also we don't want it to be too complicated that we can't engage with it. And so we try and find these midpoints. And actually, I think breath on the face of it can appear almost too good to be true, too simple. But actually there is a complexity to it and such a breadth of different ways that we can engage with it, that actually there is a lot more to it than at face value. And I think that I really love being able to share with people. But I do think that ability that we have to underestimate the breath has been a driver of that growth in recent time, because we're sort of going, okay, there's this wellness revolution, this self-development revolution. And this is one of many modalities that people are waking up to. And a lot of these modalities, I know that you're a fan of cold water as well. These are simple things, they're ancient wisdom that we're now tapping back into because of the widespread angst that we find ourselves amongst in society at large. There's so much anxiety, there's so much ill health, that we need these things. And so the ones that really work, I think, rise to the top naturally.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I really like that, because that's a kind of a natural evolution of efficacy in a way. It's like the doing, because people will abandon what doesn't work relatively quickly, in the grand scheme of things. And I think what I hear when you say what you've just shared is that, in your own practice, similar to mine, that there's this evolution of awareness of just how great the scope of what breathwork can provide is. Now, I know you trained in connected breathwork originally with the very lovely Alan Dolan of Breath Guru, who's also been on this series. And from there, like, what happened in your personal journey with breath? In fact, let's go back one step before that. How did you come to breathwork?
Yeah. So I suppose my breathwork gateway drug, if we want to call it that, my entry point into breathwork was with Richie Bostock. Yeah, so
Oh,
Richie and I are now, I've not spoken, we don't catch up very often, but we're firm friends, and he's been a huge catalyst for me on a personal level at the beginning of that journey, but also, an ongoing professional and personal kind of inspiration as well. I just think he has done such an amazing job both in the UK and beyond for this work. And
yeah.
the way in which I came to a Richie Bostock session was from I suppose the age of about 15, perhaps a little bit before, had some challenges with my mental health, and through my late teens and early 20s, I found myself developing increasing anxiety, and in my early 20s that developed into panic attacks, and there was also low mood and what I would call, in hindsight, depression as a result of the anxiety. The anxiety became quite all consuming and really left me in a really challenging yet high functioning space. I had a job, I went to university, I had friends, on the face of it, high functioning, but definitely in a highly dysregulated state, very, very hypervigilant. And that for me was, I suppose, the starting point and the catalyst for what then turned into a series of events, including the breakdown of a relationship, the loss of a friend, and a few other things where I hit, we talk about rock bottoms, but I hit a breaking point where things had to change. I felt like I had no other choice but to take action, and that was not easy, but necessary. And I started getting into, you see these long, now fairly cliche lists of, if you're struggling with your mental health, you should try X, Y, and Z. And I started trying X, Y, Z, A, B, C, E, D, F, G. I was going through all of the list and more. And I started practicing yoga. I started practicing meditation. And these are things that still make up my practices, but I didn't find anything that really hit that sweet spot of the anxiety and the panic that I was experiencing. And I was practicing yoga at a studio locally, and the head trainer there, who's now a good friend of mine and actually a business partner of mine, he said, "Oh, why don't you stick around for breath work?" And I just rolled my eyes and said, "I don't think it's for me." As a closed-minded, I still am very kind of thought-led, very heady young man at that point in time, pretty cynical, pretty skeptical. I wouldn't have ever dreamt of referring to myself as spiritual, which I now kind of laugh and scoff at the idea that that was just not a part of my life. And eventually I, for whatever reason, just thought, okay, this week, it was a few weeks into him saying this, I went, okay, like, let's give this a shot. What have I got to lose? That was my mindset with a lot of this stuff. It's, it's not going to make things worse. And that was the beginning. That was the, excuse me, that was the first connected breathwork session I ever had. And
And
I'd
that
love,
was with Richie.
that was with Richie. Yeah.
Oh,
And I would love to say, I think it would be a much more compelling marketing narrative to say, and that was it, that changed everything. And as you and I well know, that's rarely the case. You can have incredibly impactful first sessions, but actually it came over time. And there was enough in it for me to stick with it. I think the physicality of it, the lightness that I felt at the end of a session was unlike anything that I'd come across before. And it was like the switch had been flipped. I suddenly had an appreciation for the remote control aspect of the breath, the ability to shift my state through my conscious thought. That for me was, having had so many challenges with anxiety and feeling very
Mm.
passive to my triggers and my thoughts and my experience of life, all of a sudden I had this tool to support myself. And that was a big part of, that was a massive part of my working through some of those challenges.
Mm. I'm really glad that you pointed to that piece about your age and what you're experiencing, because I think a lot of young men around that age of sort of 18 to, early to mid 20s will be in that place because there's so much pressure, especially after lockdown and everything that happened there. And a lot of that generation were in that as they were either in their A levels or in their university experience. So thank you for bringing that in and for naming the fact that it could be both a slow burn but also something that you recognize. So tell me or tell us a little bit more about in what way was that awareness different for how you could experience your self-regulation capacity to other things that you were trying. You've mentioned yoga,
Mm.
mindfulness, a few other things. What made the breath work different?
I think, and this is something that I cite quite a lot with my clients as well, is that I was very, I always have been, always will be quite a logical person. And for me, there was something about the active nature of breath work that stuck and that made sense with the way that my brain worked at the time. I think the Western mind in particular likes input outcome rather than, open awareness meditation that just, is still input and outcome, but actually it's a lot more passive in nature, and it's a little bit more or it could be viewed as a little bit more sitting there waiting. Whereas breathwork felt like it was an active process that I was perhaps tied to control patterns as well, of going, this is me doing this for myself. And I think that was a big factor to sort of go, oh, I have a level of responsibility. I always like to talk about responsibility as the ability to respond. It sort of gave me this ability to respond in the moment, to engage with my nervous system, regulate myself, shift my state on almost on cue. And that was a revelation to me at the time. I was like, wow, like I was very much of the belief of, this is breathing. But there's so much more to it. And I think with the connected breath, I think initially that was an opening to spirituality for me. And I view spirituality as this acknowledgement and acceptance and appreciation of things beyond myself that I will never fully understand. And that, to me, that sort of connection to something other than, bigger than, has stuck and stayed with me and been a huge part of that onward journey. And so I think this is, I think, to come back to what we were saying at the start of the conversation, this is the beauty of breathwork for me, is like, there's nuts and bolts of functional breathing, nasal breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, CO2 tolerance that is so pragmatic, so practical. And then you can come and sit in a connected breath journey and have this transcendent spiritual experience. And both of those are breathing, both of those are breath work. And how amazing that we can tune into that through these practices in varied ways and similar ways.
Yeah, what a fantastic answer. And I would say similarly for me, what brought me into connected breathwork was one of those kind of transcendent experiences that I hadn't gone looking for. I
Mm.
just literally, I was in Bali. I was staying at the place that Alchemy used to run. I was invited to a graduation breathwork session. I was like, yeah, why not? I'm here. Went in, boom, something huge happened. And then I was like, wow, That came from breath. But then side by side, parallel to that, and this did come at a later date because I've always had a connection with and an investment in spirituality through my shamanic practices. But what came for me later was this greater awareness of functional breathing and science. You know, we've both trained in Oxygen Advantage with Patrick McEwen, another big shout out for the legacy that he's building. And that level of functional breathing, breath awareness, which is so intricately connected to the nervous system and the physiology, has without doubt helped me learn how to work with the breath in a different day-to-day way.
Mm.
You know, is that the same for you? I mean, what took you into wanting to go towards Oxygen Advantage, for example?
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. I think I, I've sort of identified recently in myself, with a bit of hindsight, perhaps some issues, not issues, some interesting patterns around my relationship with authority and taking something as gospel. I've always struggled to take something as gospel, and I've certainly seen that in some of my resistance towards certain schools of breathwork, because I think for some people, it's nice to be told this is the script to follow, this is why it works, this is what's going on. I've always, for
Yeah.
whatever reason, just been someone who's questioned anything that seems too dogmatic to me. There's probably, it's sort of, what are you hiding from? What criticism, what change, what questioning are you reluctant to explore?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a slightly roundabout answer, but I think that somewhat drove my desire to go, I think connected breathing is amazing. I'm going to explore that. Oh, I also have heard someone mention, something around the respiratory system and carbon dioxide, and I want to explore that because I have quite a scientific brain. And so it was almost saying, and I think it's this ability that I think it's important to develop for us to be able to hold two potentially conflicting truths and
Yeah.
sort of opposing beliefs potentially, and be able to discern what is good or what is right for us as an individual. And I try and as well sort of bring that to my clients and say, okay, a connected breath might not be the appropriate thing for this person at this time. I think that most people have, obviously taking safety into account, most people have the capacity to benefit from a connected breath practice, but actually it might not be right now based on their biomechanics or their biochemistry or other things that they might have going on in their lives. And so I think that drove it in part. I was like, I want to understand this breadth of breath. I want to understand. I was definitely not
Breadth
going to be
of
saying
breath.
that too quickly.
Nice.
Yeah, the breadth of breath work, I think was really important for me to understand, so that I could almost come to my own conclusions as to, okay,
Mm.
everyone, this is the way the world works, capitalistic society, everyone has something to sell. I have something to sell. It's, and we can do that in different ways, but actually when there is an element of marketing and sales attached to anything, I think it's really important to have that healthy skepticism about it and going, okay, let's look at what's beneath this. Let's look at what the truth, or not even the truth, but my own view towards this is.
Yeah.
With the Oxygen Advantage in particular, and Patrick's work, I have quite a long history of playing quite high level sport as well, and so there was definitely a driver of like, I found it really nice and exciting to connect back to that part of myself, and
Mm.
that slightly not forgotten, but I've not played team sport for a long time. I've not been in that world for quite a long time, and I've definitely lost touch with some of those elements of myself. And it was really, really nice to reconnect to that too. So I think there's probably a subtle additional driver there.
It's so interesting to me what drives us, because my drive towards Oxygen Advantage came from the fact that ever since I was small, I've been a questioner. I've also rejected authority. I've
Mm,
gone, well, just because you say that's like that doesn't mean it is like that. And I love the thing that you just mentioned about holding these two seemingly opposing paradoxical truths, because for me, that's the heart of my work. My program is where science meets mysticism. And it's like, how do we acknowledge the fundamental importance of both? Like hearing your story now, your background in sports, your logical brain mind, and how you work helps me understand you as the
mm,
human. And yet I see very much in your work through your social media this enormous kind of like uh I suppose regard for the human aspects of people, you know, and this showed up for me, and I'm going to mention this now, on the Airheads event that the very wonderful Tom and Mike ran recently. I came to your session; it was one of the first, I think, and I don't often get to breathe with people, so I was like going, "Oh, great, you know, Jamie's on, brilliant! I'm going to show up and breathe." And your session was really powerful, but surprisingly gentle. And
Mhm.
it was in the evening, and it was the end of day one where that was their intention. But I was like, wow, I really love this. And it looked to me like a change in your work. But listening to you now, what I hear is it's not necessarily a change, it's an added dimension to your work.
Thank
Was
you.
that
Yeah.
influence? Yeah, I mean, tell me
Yeah, I
where that
think
came from.
I have tried through training and through education to build a professional sort of, I suppose, teaching toolbox that can offer different things and provide different things to different settings and be quite versatile in that sense. And so the conversation I had with Tom and Mike about that session, I just went, this is what feels good in this scenario, in this setting. And even me sat there, you know, I think it started at 10 p.m. You know, I'm there on my laptop at 10 p.m. going, what would I want? What would I, there's a little bit of, you know, what feels, just feeling into it. And I think I've been very fortunate, actually. You know, I get a lot of, I'm always mindful of blowing my own trumpet. It's a bit of a blocker for me, but I get a lot of nice compliments about my tone and my voice when it comes to my guidance, and I'm really grateful for that. And I think, especially in that kind of setting and scenario, for something that is very down regulating, we're
Mhm,
moving towards sleep and rest and recovery and everything like that. That really suits my, not even so much about my voice specifically, that really suits my natural
mm,
cadence and my natural energy. I'm not a, I've never been able to teach like a Kundalini activation, you know,
mhm,
practice, because that's not my, I'm quite earthy. I'm quite kind of naturally slower and of that pace. And so yeah, it was definitely born out of that versatility that I like to bring to my practice, and almost being able to drop into a certain
mhm,
space based on what the requirements are.
mhm,
Um, and that particular session, I think, is something I just love to offer, as a, you know, to be of service in that way, to just offer that kind of very gentle,
mm.
soothing, down regulation style practice.
Yeah, I think you're right with your voice. And Deb Dana, Stephen Porges' colleague, she says that voice is the first point of safety that we meet when we meet another being, that's
Mm.
what starts to indicate to us whether there's an invitation for connection or an invitation for contraction, because we all know that voice cadence is it, well, not everybody knows, but it's very, very important, because you and I in our day-to-day encounters will, oh, that person sounds aggressive, that person sounds shrill, that person sounds soothing, that, you know, and it's kind of a way that we can bring in awareness of all these different parts of what it is that we're creating with both the breath, with our voice, with our intention. Um, I'd like to, you know, just ask you, for people who may not be so heavily invested in breath work, who might be listening, but, you know, if they're on my channel, they typically are. Why do you do what you do? What's your big driver? Like, what do you want for people from it and for yourself?
Yeah, it's an important question. I think, why do I do what I do? I think there's, yeah, the sort of um, the self-led side, and then I suppose the more of service side, and there's definitely crossover in the middle. I think it's primarily driven by a desire to be of service, to help others, to I suppose, from my own personal experience, to be able to provide the um, the support and healing that I found through the breath to others in whatever form that needs to take for them. Um, I'm a big. This is something I actually got from a great conversation from another mutual friend of ours, Pat DeVille,
Oh
where
yeah.
he was talking about his his purpose and his mission. And I've not quite come up with my sort of pithy one-liner just yet, but I'm a huge advocate and a huge believer in creating connected spaces for introspection. So it's introspection and self-healing in community. I think that for me is a huge driver, and something that I found so much value in, because I think I was saying this to a group a couple of weeks ago, and we mentioned earlier this self-development revolution, and that's been amazing for self-awareness, and we've all become a lot more self-aware, but it's very self-heavy. It's very read your books, listen to your podcasts, go to therapy, understand your patterns, your triggers, your conditioning, and help yourself. And we can, within that, lose touch with community, co-regulation, and really healthy, authentic community. And I think that's probably driven partly by a selfish, not in a negative sense, a selfish drive for that myself, to feel connected to myself and to others. So that, I think, is a big driver behind what I do. On a personal level, I think there's definitely threads there where, I think what we seek to provide to others, we're often seeking within ourselves. So I think there's definitely an element of that where I've perhaps felt for parts of my life a little bit of a lone wolf, a little bit of an outsider. And that still shows up in various forms. I think there's something potentially naturally ostracizing about being the facilitator, because actually you're creating the space for other people and you're a part of it, but you can't necessarily always be fully in. So I think there's maybe something in that. But for myself, it's to actually get into this work, I suppose, if we want to talk about it as work, was about autonomy, being my own boss, ultimately flexibility that lies within that. Again, tying back to, I suppose, challenges with authority as well. And to be able to build a life that feels good to me, that feels free, that feels peaceful and easeful. And that isn't always the case, but it's something that I'm always, coming back to and course correcting towards, because I think it's very easy, even in a sort of purpose-driven way of working, to fall back into the norm in terms of ways of working, in terms of striving. And there's nothing wrong with ambition, but I think we've always got to question that why. So yeah, a bit of a roundabout answer, but I think creating those spaces for self discovery in community, and for me, that autonomy, that flexibility, and connection to others and to myself through my work.
Yeah, I relate to every piece of what you just shared, and you've just led me really nicely into my next question for you, because you've spoken about what you overcame, that brought you to the breath and that brought you towards this way that you're now working with your, let's call it purpose, which sometimes feels a bit crass, but it's a thing that people can chase and feel that they're never anywhere near, but anyway, for the sake of the conversation, that's what you've overcome. What do you continue to have to overcome in order to grow and, as you say, course correct and just keep on checking in with yourself where you are?
Plenty. I slightly stumbling over my words here, but only because it's quite present at the moment. I've always had challenges in relationship, romantically, and more so, less so with friendships, but yeah, certainly in romantic relationship, I have my challenges, and that is something that, without going into the depths of, is present at the moment, and something that has been a big chunk and piece of work for a number of years. And that it does still have I'm always keen to be as real and authentic around this stuff as I can. It's something that has the capacity to sideswipe me and really throw me off of a lot of my game. I think as far as triggers go, the biggest last remaining ones for me that I continue to work with lie in that realm. And so I'm bringing this up purely because it's very current. but a beautiful opportunity, as it always is, and to find a partner who can sit in that space with you, I think is really has the capacity to be incredibly healing. On more of a work and this conversation level, I think something that I have been writing about recently is around something I touched on there with ambition.
Mm,
So I think often we go on this, as we become more self-aware, as we connect more to self and essence and kind of our truth, I found myself, and I see it a lot in people I know, I found myself getting less ambitious in the traditional sense, because I started to heal wounds around self-worth and
mm,
having to prove my worth through what I deliver and what I do. And that's been a big part of my life, because it was sport and it was school, and it was just like proving my worth ultimately to parent, but to society at large. And
mm,
um, as I became less ambitious, perhaps in that way, that then came into conflict with building a business, with building the life that I want, with the system that we operate in. And so I've
mm,
had to really start to reconcile, okay, accepting and acknowledging, I suppose, the ambitious part of myself, the businessman, the entrepreneur who gets excited by these things, who gets excited about, sharing this work, with the part of myself that wants the peaceful, easy life with, a much slower pace. And so it's sort of these two conflicting sides. And that can definitely ebb and flow and be quite cyclical in nature. I'll go into a real place of striving, and then I'll come to the end of it, I'll be like, oh, I don't feel good, and then I'll ease off a little bit. And so I'd love to level that out a little bit more. I'm all for the cyclical nature of these things, but I think I'd like a little bit more stability within that.
mm,
And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think ego and external validation. I think
mm,
social media, especially as you grow a presence on social media, which I'm very fortunate to have done to an extent. You have to be very mindful of how that plays out, and how you can, on a neurochemical level, the role of dopamine and the role of kind of engagement and chasing that as well. And so always just trying to check myself and check in with my why. Why am I doing this? What's driving this?
mm.
What place is it coming from within me? And how can I, be compassionate and kind towards myself when I don't always get it right, and being really accepting of the fact that I will never get it right all of the time. And just doing my best, I think, is always what I come back to.
Honestly, Jamie, it's like listening to a male version of myself. Like everything you're saying, I am so deeply resonating with, because we have created these lives, both you and I, from what I can certainly see, that have given us some of that freedom, that have stepped us away from having to go to work for somebody else, having to, work to pay the bills, and then only getting that little window at the weekend. And how amazing is that? But there is a hard slog involved in continuing to pay your way in the world, in a society that values productivity and doing way over being. I get what you're saying
Mm,
about worth proving. I get what you're saying. And then there's this other piece, and it's like, well, hang on a minute. If I'm going to have to choose between that old way of doing it for somebody else with very few choices, and this new way of doing it for myself with more choices, well, that's the one I want. So then how do I find that balance?
yeah,
And that's what I'm hearing you working with and towards.
absolutely. And I think it's this. I don't think there's ever. I think the striving within that conflict for me is, I'm trying to find a way of being that fulfills both sides. And actually, I think
Mm.
it's more about getting comfortable with the polarity of it, and the way that you can just, it's very rare that we're ever just at center all the time. It's sort of, you fall a little bit that way, and then you go, oh, you bring awareness to it, and you go a little bit that way back to the middle, and then maybe you tip a little bit too far the other way because you don't want to go back that way again. And I think that to me has been one of the biggest lessons in my healing, where in all forms, I even saw it in my own journey with my masculinity and emotional expression. I went from being relatively unable to be aware of my emotions, let alone express them, to maybe emotionally dumping, and the other pole, which is going too far and just, it's always emotional, it's always that. And it's okay, like, how do we gradually stop going from extreme to extreme and come back to a slightly smaller fluctuation in the middle of that spectrum, which is just an ongoing frustration and lesson, and one that I'm trying to enjoy.
Yeah, that kind of thing there in your case, talking about emotional evangelism, you know, when we discover something new and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm working this muscle, it's brilliant, everybody needs to do this. And then we go, oh, let me just pull it back to discernment. That for me is where we can sit in the middle with the awareness and the choice about responding. You know, you talked earlier about responsibility. And that's so important as well, you know, to find that place. And I do want to say to people who might be watching, because I really am relating to this that you're sharing, it's, you know, for me, last month, I earned not a single penny for the whole of June, right? Not one single penny. And then people go like, well, how is that possible then? Aren't you scared? And it's like, yeah, but you know, if we create a vision that's more of a whole with those dreams and where we want to head, and if we can stay in trust, and if we can check and align and keep, you know, coming back into balance, then I think we can trust more in those quiet moments. And I know that that's part of what I've created, by the way, so I'm not just being ignorant about people's financial stresses here. But there's this huge level of, you know, we are deeply, deeply programmed into responding from productivity, and our
Yeah.
value comes from that place. So if you were to give somebody a piece of advice in what they are juggling now, if they're working in the holistic field, if they're working in breath work, if they're kind of new, maybe coming to the end of a training, what would you share from your own experience?
I think there's one that stands out above all others, and it's a quote from, arguably, we just talked about productivity. He's probably a master of productivity in a lot of people's eyes. A guy called Naval Ravikant, very successful angel investor, entrepreneur, and he's got a lot of very good one-liners, and the one that always sticks with me when it comes to, I suppose, advice around building a business, I think, and a brand, it's escape competition through authenticity. That
Oh,
that to me
oh,
is, it's gold, because I certainly see in myself at points, but certainly in the wellness world, someone will look at you know, Richie Bostock's profile. If we come back to Richie, they'll go, okay, what's Richie done? Because that's worked. So I'm going to replicate that, and that's going to work for me because it worked for him.
yeah, yeah,
When in actual fact, what's worked for Richie has worked because it's Richie, and what's worked for me has worked for me because it's me.
yeah.
And I think that is, people can, whether they're aware of it or not, smell authenticity from a mile off. If you're trying to be a certain way that just isn't who you are, it won't land with people, because actually the way in which you talk, the way in which you write, everything will feel, to bring it into the current, it will feel like it's been written by AI, because it's just generated by what you think you should be doing rather than what flows through you. And I think that's one of the most sort of valuable bits of advice that I've ever received. And the second one is another quote from an old business coach of mine, which was very much relates to what we've talked about around speed and productivity, which is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So it's this idea, I think it's from a rowing team actually, or Navy SEALs, of some water-based outfit, and just this idea that actually, if you're chaotic in the water, then it's going to be messy and it's going to be a fight, and it won't even be that clean and that quick. But actually, if you're steady and efficient in your movements and it's considered, then actually you get where you're going not only quicker, but in a much smoother ride as well. And so I know, and it's a really good friend of mine sent me The Surrender Experiment by Michael
Oh
Singer.
yeah. Yeah.
And it took me a little while, again, it was a little bit like my first breathwork session. It took me a little while to get around to opening it. And it's just everything in that. It's, there is always a place for hard work. There is always a place for getting stuff done and grinding, but it has to come from a place of abundance and desire to do that, rather than kind of fighting tooth and nail, grafting away and really struggling. There shouldn't be a struggle to your hard work,
Mm,
even though it can feel hard at times, because I think when you are in that struggle, it's always going to create more struggle. And I
mm,
think that, to me, is something that I regularly course correct on, because when money is slow, or when business is slow, or when I feel a bit of imposter syndrome, I can very easily go into, let's do everything. Let's fight really, really hard here to bring this back up to a level that feels comfortable, rather than actually relaxing into the uncertainty. And again, this isn't to diminish the reality of paying bills and work. And I
mm.
think it's very easy to sit here and just say, allow it just to flow, surrender and see what happens. I think we often conflate surrender with doing nothing. And actually, we conflate acceptance with sort of this radical acceptance with complacency. And there's no complacency in this. It's still, we're getting stuff done. We're working really hard. But it's, again, coming back to, where is that driver coming from? What is motivating the hard work, and what is the intention behind it? And that is something that that's also fairly present for me at the moment, because I feel like I'm in a little bit of a battle right now, and one that I'm just trying to ever so slightly surrender to.
Oh, that was so rich. I really want to repeat that. I wrote it down, escape competition through authenticity, which is so topical for me at the moment because as human beings, just based on what you've just said and what you've shared, we're always getting the opportunity to grow, evolve, see ourselves, feel the reflections and feel where we're being authentic and inauthentic. And to add to what you just said, for people who are just perhaps newly emerging and going, oh my god, will this ever work for me, I always say to them, there were years when I was running more than one job. I got a little, if I didn't want to be too tired, I went and got a job in a little cafe and just served coffee. When I say just, sorry, that's not to diminish, again, because I ran my own cafes and juice bars for years, but I would do what needed to be done to pay the bills, but to give me enough dream space and to hold that faith and that vision of like, well, what is it I want to do? What do I want to express? So, I mean, you've just encapsulated that so beautifully. So just as a closing note, I mean, where are you going at the moment? You mentioned that you're doing Martin's course, who's also been on this podcast. Amazing guy, so knowledgeable, ridiculously knowledgeable. So why are you doing that, and what does that point to in your vision for yourself and your work?
Yeah, Martin is brilliant. I was tempted to say too knowledgeable, but there's no such thing. There's just, he is a fountain of knowledge and his curiosity and his real ability to question the norm and question the stuff that's already out there. I think he does it in a very good way, and a very helpful way, I think, for the space at large. He's posted some stuff on Instagram that will definitely rub certain people up the wrong way, but I'm all for it. Even when it triggers me, I'm like, yeah, this is good. Let's lean into this. So that for me was a desire to deepen my knowledge and my personal practice even further, more than anything. Just sort of coming, I realized it had been a while since I'd sat in the student chair. And I think that was something that I know, to keep progressing and becoming the best version of myself in this capacity. That was something I wanted to do. And that felt like the right thing at the right time. What that points towards, I think, is a continued expansion of who I am as a practitioner, and within that, the business that I have built thus far, which I've now started talking a little bit more around this concept of full spectrum breathwork, which is looking at kind of this end-to-end element of breathwork that we've discussed as well. And I think longer term, I would love to I would love to get to a space where I feel ready to train other people. I think that's definitely a longer term view for me. And we could have a whole nother hour-long conversation around the world of facilitated trainings and some of the stuff out in the market. And I would never want to fall into some of what we see in there of perhaps irresponsible work and unsafe work in some capacity,
Mhm.
or what I would view as that. Um, and just continuing to get curious about the breath and to learn new things. I think ever since I started teaching connected breathing, I've had a curiosity to go deeper into the science of it. I think there's so much there that we're yet to explore. And yes, it's from a wanting to understand place and a knowledge perspective and an education perspective, but also I think it opens up a whole new world for more skeptical individuals to engage with connected breathing. If we can say, okay, not everyone's just going to walk into that room because we said they should. Some people are going to need that little push. And I think when it comes to mainstream trauma therapy, when it comes to mainstream acknowledgement, I think the science is, whether we like it or not, an incredibly important piece of that puzzle and an integral piece of that puzzle. So I'd love to go down that sort of that route as well, to see what we can bring to light on that side of things, and just trying to enjoy it along the way.
So inspiring and so wonderful to hear of your intentions and your intentions for growth, your vision for growth, and your intentions for slowing down and holding the paradox in your own life. I relate to everything you shared, particularly around relationship being your great teacher and challenge. It's in
Hmm.
my birth chart, apparently. It might be in yours as
I
well.
wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So, Jamie, I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing who you are and what you do and what you've overcome and bringing that human aspect into this incredible work. Anything coming up right now that you would particularly like to share?
um, Mainly events in London. So I do regular events in London, that I am very grateful that I get if I have a 20-person breathe, there tends to be maybe 10 new people and 10 regulars. And I love that. So I love seeing new people come into those spaces. Um, I've got a retreat coming up at the end of August in Portugal, a connected breathing
Ooh.
retreat, which is I'm really, really, really looking forward to. Um, and then I'm working on a few bits in the background from a more sort of online perspective that I'm excited to share with people. So
Mm.
just, encourage and invite anyone who's curious to sort of just stay tuned and watch this space. And I've got lots of things out there, and free resources and other resources that people can access. And I'm always as well very, very happy to have a conversation about this work, about my work, and anything that might sort of come to people's minds for a
Mm.
conversation.
And do you have a website?
Yes, I do. So it's thebreathspace.co.uk, and the breath space on Instagram as well.
Yeah. So you've been listening to Jamie Clements of the breathspace.co.uk. Go check him out, go look into his work, and I personally look forward to seeing where the future takes you, Jamie. Thank you so much for your authenticity and for showing up in the way that you do in this work. As a man holding breathwork space, I really, really appreciate there's something about your the quality of your presence and your softness that is really landing for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Steph. That means a lot.
Mm.